Welcome to Bentley House Kits. This is the instructional video for both the 1/12 scale and 1/24 scale sink set kit from Bentley House Minis. You can find the 1/12 instructions from the beginning to minute mark 22:50 and the 1/24 instructions from that same point to the end of the video. Let's begin putting together the 1/12 scale kit. It comes with 2 large pieces of mat board and 1 small cardstock detail sheet. To begin construction, I'm going to cut out all 3 pieces that are marked with the letter A. One of the pieces has some engraved lines and some other engraved letters on the face of it. You're going to be gluing all 3 of these pieces together to create a triple thickness. Make sure that the piece with the engraved lines is glued on top. I'm going to be using tacky glue for this process, and sometimes tacky glue can make the mat board warp, so if you're using tacky glue as well, or any other glue with some kind of water consistency in it, be sure to put it underneath something heavy as it dries so that it continues to lay flat. Now I've cut out 2 pieces that were marked with the letter B. One of them again has the engraved lines that needs to be glued on top, and I've also cut out 4 pieces that are marked with the letter C. The 4 pieces that are marked C are going to be glued together in pairs, so at the end you have 2 pieces that are a double thickness. As I did before, I'm going to be letting all these pieces dry underneath something heavy. If you don't have 1, 2, 3 blocks, you can use a book. It works just the same. While those dried, I cut out 1 piece marked D, 2 pieces marked E, and 2 more pieces marked F. And then there were also 2 pieces that are marked with the letter G, and this is what they look like. I've laid out the pieces so you can see how they're going to go onto the sink. We do need to prepare piece F before we attach it to the sink back. This is going to be with the cardstock pieces. This is just an easy way I've done in the kit so that you can put some paper lines across the face of it. You just line it up with the engraved lines, add some glue, put the cardstock over top, and allow it to dry. This is going to give a ridged effect, which was common on these types of sinks to make sure that the water was draining into the sink basin. After it's dry, just cut away the rest of the cardstock. Before attaching these new pieces, we're going to take one of our double thick pieces that we made with the C pieces, and we're going to glue them to the very far face on either side of the sink back. This is going to stick out and start to create the body of our sink. Once those are attached, we can take the piece marked F and glue it along the line and on top of the double thick pieces marked C. This is going to start to create a slope where the water can drain down into the sink. It sits right on top of those pieces we previously glued. Now moving on to the pieces marked E, these are going to be glued up underneath the pieces that are marked F and again along the engraved line. This is going to make the sides of our sink basin. This is what it looks like when both sides are glued in place. Now we can move on to the piece that's marked D. This is going to be the very bottom of our sink, and it's going to be glued up underneath both pieces marked E. Make sure you have already removed the hole in your laser cut piece for the sink drain. Now we're going to work with the pieces that are marked G. These are going to go on either side underneath the piece marked F. It's very important that you make sure this larger hole is in the front corner of the sink. This is going to be where the peg of the sink leg goes into, and so it needs to be in the position for the leg to be correct. Once you glue it in, this is where the hole should be, and it will be mirrored on the other side so that you have the holes in the opposite corners towards the front of the sink body. Once this is all dry, we're going to add pieces that we glued together that were marked B. You're going to add glue along the front edges of all the pieces we just glued so that we can attach the B piece. You will see the engraved lines that will line up with your previously glued pieces. I found the easiest way to make sure everything lines up is to do this flat on my work surface so that I can carefully combine the 2 pieces together and then also make sure that the 2 sides of the sink line up. Now I'm adding a little bit of weight for a while it glues, and here is our completed sink body. At this point, it's a good idea to sand the edges if you want a softer, more rounded look. Make sure you are sanding along with the mat board and not towards the inside of the mat board, because you can accidentally pull the paper up away from the surface of the mat board. Now we're going to be using this cardstock piece, and this is going to create a very smooth finish inside of our sink. This is an optional step and does not have to be completed if you don't want to do it. The best way I have found to apply the cardstock is to push it down carefully with a pencil so that the hole of the drain and the hole of the cardstock line up. Then I can carefully push down the sides on either edge. I found another easy way to do this instead of with my fingers is with something like a highlighter or some kind of pen that has a very smooth edge. This allows me to crease the paper in the correct areas. Once that's in place, you may notice that there's a small amount of cardstock that's sticking up on either edge of the sink. Simply mark off however much is overhanging so that you can take a straight edge and cut off the excess. Depending on how you glued it together, you may not have anything to cut off. It just depends on the type of glue and how closely your pieces are together. I'm using a straight edge and a sharp blade to cut off the excess, and then I'm going to begin gluing this piece in place. This is going to cover over some of the edges of the mat board and make the sink look more smooth. Again, this is optional, and if you find this might be a little frustrating for you, it's not necessary to complete the sink. Once I have it in place, I'm using the highlighter again to push all the edges down and make sure that my glue process is smooth. Once that's dry, I can go ahead and paint the body of the sink with some acrylic paint. I highly suggest just using acrylic straight out of the bottle without adding any water for your first layer of paint so that it doesn't warp your mat board. Now we're going to be moving on to the sink legs. First, you need to cut them apart with a very sharp craft blade. Make sure to cut away from your hands. Once they've been separated from the extra pieces of printed plastic, there will be a peg on top of each leg that slides into the hole in piece G. Once you've dry fit everything and know that it works, you're going to add some tacky glue into the hole and around the edges where the leg is going to touch. It should fit very snug up in that corner and touch the sides of the sink. Now I can continue painting and make sure I get the legs and the bottom side of the sink. Now that I have my legs attached and everything's painted, I want to put a gloss coat on top of my sink, and I'm going to show you how I did this just in case you are following the same steps. I found a pencil covered in some paper and stuck through some foam. It was really great for holding the sink up off the surface while I sprayed it. Now I'm going to be moving on to the pipes, and if you're using the kit, you're going to have two squares. The bigger square has the lower pipes for underneath the sink, and the smaller square has the upper faucet pipes that are going to go above the sink. You're going to have to remove all the extra plastic pieces. Now when you put these together, you're going to be putting the U-shaped pipe underneath the disc shape, and then there's going to be an L-shaped pipe that gets hooked onto that one, and you want to make sure that there's this little dot that goes on top. So it's going to look something like this once you have it all connected together. This is going to be the pipe that goes underneath the sink. I found the best way to glue them together is with some super glue because these pieces are made of plastic. They all have convenient tabs and slots, so they fit together really easily. While that's drying, we can construct the upper faucet pipes as well. It's very similar. There is going to be a faucet head, and this one actually is going to need a little bit of sanding. Thankfully, you can sand this 3D printed plastic, and once it's sanded smooth, you can fit it into the lower part of the faucet, which is going to be connected to the sink. Once it's glued together, this is how it's going to look. The handles were just a little bit too small for my filament printer to handle, so we're going to be making them out of paper. Each handle is going to be made out of 3 of these X pieces and 2 little dots. We're going to be gluing all of the X pieces on top of each other to make a triple thickness. And then on top of those pieces, we're going to be gluing the 2 little tiny dots so that it looks like a little screw that's going to be holding this piece in place. Once I've made both of those, I can glue it on top of my 3D printed handles so that they're sitting on top of the tubes that are coming out of the back part of the faucet. This is how it looks once they're both glued in place. They will not be working handles, so you cannot turn them. We're also going to glue one on the back of the pipe here so it looks like some kind of shut-off valve. While we're making these pieces, I'm going to go ahead and cut out this little circle that's going to be the piece that goes around our drain cover. We're also going to cut out piece H1 and H2 from the mat board sheet. This is going to be a little piece that's going to go up against the wall wherever the pipe hits the wall. Before gluing anything else together, we need to paint all of this. I'm doing a base coat of black and then a coat of silver over top of that. Except for the very top part of the sink drain, because I want that to stay black, so when you look inside of the drain you can't tell that I don't want it to be silver in there. And I just used some super glue to glue this piece in place over the sink drain and let it dry. Now I can add my faucet pieces. The pegs on the back should fit snugly in the holes. However, if some gunk did build up from your spray finish, just make sure to scrape that out. Then you can add tacky glue. Since these fit pretty snug, I didn't feel like super glue was needed. Tacky glue worked just fine to hold this faucet in place. And here's how it's looking once I have the faucet and the lower pipes underneath the sink. And while I was at this point, I painted the circle that goes around the drain and glued that in place. And then the H1, H2 pieces, these are going to fit on the back of the lower part of the pipes. And I'm not going to glue that on until I know that it fits correctly with the wall that I'm putting the sink against. We are now going to be making some hooks that are going to go in these small holes underneath. When I was originally doing my research for this project, I found that many times pots and pans were stored under the sink, just kind of hanging there. So I wanted to create this in miniature as well. I'm using the wire from the kit, or you can also use some paper clips for this, to create a J shape with a short, straight piece on top, which is what's going to go through the hole and hold the hook in place. I'm adding some glue to the straight edge and I'm holding on to the hook with my pliers, and then I'm just going to put it through the hole and rotate the sink so that the flat edge is now sitting on top of the mat board, holding it in place. I added a little extra glue around the edges and allowed it to dry completely. Now I can hang some pots and pans. As long as they have a hole in the handle, they can hang underneath the sink, giving it a little bit more realism, just like they might have done in the 1930s. The first thing we're going to make off of this page is, out of all these shapes at the top, this is going to make a very small, thin teacup shelf. I'm going to start with pieces I, 2 pieces marked J, and 1 piece marked L. The 2 J pieces are going to be glued to the face of piece I along either side, making sure to line up the engraved line that goes through the center. That's going to let us know where to put the middle shelf. Piece L is going to be glued in between the 2 pieces marked J and against the back. There will be a slight gap, and that's okay. Now I'm going to use one of the pieces marked M as the center shelf. I'm just going to match it up with the engraved lines. It's best to let this dry a little bit and make sure the sides are completely straight. Now I'm going to be using one of the other pieces marked M, 1 piece marked N, and a piece marked O. Pay attention how these go together. O is going to be glued on top of piece N, making sure that the engraved line gets lined up so it's a continuous line. I know that sounds confusing, but I'll show you what I mean once it's together. You're going to glue the piece on top, and then you can see that this engraved line gets continued, just like that. And then the small circles will sit on top of the ovals, so you can really only see through the small circles. Then I'm going to glue everything on top of piece M, and this is going to be a triple thick piece, which I'm going to allow to dry with some clamps. Now, if you don't get this exactly right, it's okay, but the holes are making room for some hooks if you do want to hang teacups underneath the shelf. I'm going to add glue to both pieces M and N and glue that just inside the shelf. Piece O is still going to stick out a little at the bottom, so here you can see how you can still see the edges all around piece O. It is sticking out, and that is okay. Now I'm using piece K. It's a little bit more decorative. It's going to finish off the top of our tea shelf. If you are using the kit, it already has some engraved pieces that you can have show, or you can turn them backwards so they don't show. If you're hand cutting this, you can just cut out some punches and glue them on top if you want something fancy in the corners. So this is our completed teacup shelf. I think it's really cute, but let's add some hooks to the bottom of it, so if you did have some teacups you wanted to hang, you could. For this part of the project, I'm making hooks just like I did for the sink. They are going to slip inside the small holes, and the long part of the back of the hook is going to sit inside that oval we previously glued. I'm going to add in all 4 hooks, add some extra glue, and let it dry. And that's how you assemble the teacup shelf. Next, we're going to put together the long shelf, which is over here in the bottom right corner. Start by gluing both pieces that are marked V together. This is going to create a double thickness, which will help your shelf be strong, especially when you start putting other miniature items on top. Just like the other parts of the kit, I have an engraved pattern on these pieces. However, if you don't want them to show, you can just glue the brackets together in a different way. You are going to be gluing 2 of them together. So if you want the engraved pieces out, you can glue them that way, or you can glue them inside. I'm going to be gluing them out so that you can see the pattern. I'm gluing these together so I have 3 pairs of 2 that are glued. Now I'm going to sand the shelf. It's a little bit easier to sand this before you attach the brackets. I'm adding glue to the very top square and top edge of the brackets, and these are going to slide into the back of the shelf. It is going to stick up just a tiny bit on the top if you're using 1/16 inch mat board, but I think that gives it a very homemade feel to the shelf that you can actually see how it goes together. I'm adding in all 3 brackets, and I'm going to allow everything to dry. This is how it looks once it's put together. While that's drying, we can put together the step stool, which honestly might be my favorite piece out of the set because it can move. So we're going to use all of these pieces in sheet 2. First, you're going to cut all of the pieces marked P. I'm going to glue them into sets of 2 so that I have 2 pieces that are a double thickness. I'm going to let those dry completely, laying flat. Now I can glue the step stool seat, which is going to again have an engraved pattern. You can glue that on top if you want it to be seen, or glue it underneath if you want it to be hidden. After I've glued the 2 S pieces together, which make up this seat, I can glue the 2 pieces that are a double thickness marked P underneath the S pieces, and I want to make sure that the holes mirror each other on either side. They have to be across from each other for the project to work. This is how it's looking once it's glued, and I'm going to let that dry. It's a lot easier to do this on a mat to make sure everything's at a 90-degree angle. While that's drying, I'm going to cut out pieces Q. There's going to be 4 of these pieces, which again you're going to glue together to make a double thickness. You can decide if you want the designs to show or not. Once those are dry, I'm removing both pieces marked R. These are going to be the step tops that are going to allow the user to step up on the step stool. I'm gluing them at the very edge and the top levels of piece Q, and I'm going to glue both sides on either side, just like this. There is no overhang for the step. If you want this to work correctly, you have to glue it right at the very edge of piece R. I temporarily added the toothpick to allow it to dry at a 90-degree angle. Piece U is an optional piece to add, but it acts as a handle for the user in real life, if you're using something like this, to pull the steps down in order to convert it into a step stool, and it helps pull the step back up without having to touch the area where the foot steps onto. There are 2 pieces marked T, and these are going to be glued up underneath the seat and between both the pieces marked P. These help give your stool a finished look and help brace either sides. So now we're going to work with the toothpicks. What I'm going to do is insert the toothpicks, and I'm spinning them just a little bit. It helps them go through the mat board, and I'm going to add them in every single hole except for the one you can see left empty here on screen. In order to glue these, the best way I found to do it is to add glue just to one side, and then I'm going to slowly spin it back through the hole. This is going to allow the glue to coat the inside of the hole as the toothpick goes through. As I'm doing this, I'm making sure that my two sides are staying parallel as I'm adding each individual toothpick. Now I'm going to let everything dry completely. Make sure you do not permanently glue the toothpick into the stair step just yet. I will show you how to install that when we get to that point. This stair needs to stay free of toothpicks. Once everything's dry, I'm going to use some flush cutters to cut the very ends of the toothpicks off. This makes for a very clean yet still homemade look to the step stool. Before adding the final toothpick, I want to do a very light coat of paint because it is going to be difficult to paint it once it's installed. And that's because the steps are going to move around it freely, and adding paint could accidentally glue the steps in place. Once the painted toothpick is dry, I'm going to line up my steps and my stool just like you saw on screen. Then I can slowly thread the toothpick through all the holes of the stool and the steps. As I get all the way through, I'm going to check to make sure everything moves freely, and if I have any issues, it might mean I need to sand the holes a little bit bigger or sand down my toothpick. Either way, you want it to move something like this. Now I can follow the same toothpick gluing method, but I'm just going to have to be a lot more careful to make sure none of the glue gets on the step at all. I'm going to allow that to dry, cut off the edges just like I did the other toothpicks, and then it's ready to be painted just like everything else. So let's do that. I'm going to go with a very basic brown finish because in my project the Hoosier cabinet is just a wood looking cabinet, and so I wanted something to match that because my other appliances match each other. I want it to look a little bit rustic, but I'm also going to be adding some more chalk pastel. Of course, you can finish yours however you want to. You can also highlight those little engravings, or if you added on some punches onto yours, you can highlight those as well, giving it a little bit more interest. I'm lightly adding some black chalk pastel to the top of my step stool to make that look very worn, and also into the cracks and corners of the shelves because those would be the areas that built up the most dirt and grime over the years. I also noticed there were some areas on my step stool that needed a bit more touch up. It was a pretty difficult one to paint. And after it's all put together, this is how the 1/12 scale sink set looks. The sink, the teacup shelf, the fold-out stool, and the little long shelf that can be put above the sink. Now we're going to move on to the 1/24 scale kit instructions, which are very similar, but there are some distinct differences as this kit is much smaller than the 1/12 scale kit. In this kit, you will receive 2 double-thick cardstock sheets and 1 accessory bag that you will need to create the pipes and the legs of the sink. Let's begin with the first sheet, which is going to be creating the sink. Use a sharp blade to cut out the pieces, and if you need to, you can run the cleaning pad along the edges to remove any remaining laser ash. We're going to begin by gluing the 3 pieces that are marked A together. Make sure the piece that has the engraved letters and lines is on top so that you can see the engravings through the process. This will make it much easier to put together. You're also going to glue 2 pieces marked B together, and the 4 pieces that are marked C need to be glued together in pairs. I'm holding C in my hand now, and it's going to be glued to either side of the front of piece A. These are going to be the sides of the sink. Glue 1 on each side, and then put it down on your mat to make sure that everything is at a 90-degree angle. You're going to hold on to the piece marked B until later. Now find the pieces marked F, pieces marked E, and 1 piece marked D, and cut them out from your sheet. We're going to start with the pieces that are marked F. These need to be glued along the line on the back of piece A and up on top of the edge of piece C that we just glued. Make sure that the lines on piece F are running perpendicular to the back of piece A. Now we're going to glue piece E up underneath the piece that we just glued, piece F, and along the line. This is going to make the slope into the basin of your sink. Once both those are glued in place, we can now add glue to the bottom of both pieces marked E and glue piece D just underneath those pieces, and this will be the bottom of our sink. Most likely your kit has come with the hole already removed. However, if you still see a little bit of paper inside the hole that is the drain, make sure to remove it at this time. You will now need the pieces that are marked G from your cardstock sheet. These are going to be glued underneath the pieces F and along the line that is marked G that's engraved on piece A. You need to make sure the little round cutouts are towards the front corner of the piece. These are where your legs are going to go eventually. Once everything's dry, add glue along all of the front edges and glue piece B so that the engraved lines are facing inward to the sink, and this will complete your sink body. Here you can see the two corners have the little cutouts for piece G. While that's drying, find the decorative toothpicks from your accessory bag. You are going to cut these to be 1.5 inches long. Of course you can change it, but that is the length that I have found that makes the best height for the sink. Make sure you're keeping the part of the toothpick that has the decorative carving. Once you're ready, add glue into the space that's in piece G and carefully push your toothpick all the way up until it hits the underside of piece F. Once both legs are in place, make sure they are at a 90-degree angle before allowing it to dry. You will only have 2 legs because this sink is designed to fit up against a back wall. At this point, if you would like to, you can sand down the edges. It's not necessary, but it does give it a more rounded look. And then using some acrylic paint without any water added, you can do a base coat for your sink. If you do add water to the paint, it could warp the paper. I also added a shiny finish to mine. To create the pipes for the faucet and the lower pipes that go underneath the sink, you are going to need the 14 gauge wire and the wire jig from your accessory bag. The wire jig has 2 pieces. It's this L-shaped piece and a small square piece. Start by straightening out your wire to the best of your ability. It does not have to be perfect, but just being a little straighter than it was in the bag will be helpful. First, test your jig. There is a little half moon shape in the square piece that goes over the nodule in the L-shaped piece, just like this. So make sure you know how your jig goes together before we get started on the wire. Now you can take your wire and bend it about 1.5 inches into the wire, and you're going to set it at a 90-degree angle in this little corner on your jig. Then press your square securely in place, and this will help your wire bend in a very tight L. Once that's done, you're going to continue to hold the square in place so you can bend the rest of the wires. You're going to take the longest wire and bend it around the nodule, lining it up with the engraved pipeline that you can see on the jig. While continuing to hold the square in place, we're going to bend the other end over this U shape and continue to follow the engraved line that looks like where the pipe should lay until you have a straight line that goes all the way down the side. Once the wire is bent to your satisfaction, you can cut off at either end, and this will give you the pipes that go underneath the sink. You're going to set that to the side and make sure you keep the long length of wire that you have left over that you just cut off, because that's going to make the upper faucet pipes. So this is how it should look once you're finished. Now to move on to the upper faucet pipes, you're going to take that long length that you just cut off and cut it in half. On the other side of your jig, there is going to be a U shape. You are going to be using this same shape to bend both wires, one for the faucet head and one for the faucet lower pipes that come out of the back of the sink. It can be a little bit tricky, but it does help you get a nice U shape in your wire. Do this for both pieces. It doesn't really matter how long the 2 sides are because you are going to be cutting them both down quite a bit. So now that I have both of these wire pieces bent, I can hold them up to my sink and figure out how much I need to cut off. The lower faucet pipes need to go through these 2 holes in the back of the sink. So I held it up and knew I needed to cut off quite a bit of wire. They didn't fit through the hole because of my spray finish, so I used an X-Acto blade to carve that out a little bit more, and now they are fitting through the holes. You want to dry fit these before you glue them in place. I still am not gluing that piece because I know I have to cut off more, but at this moment I also want to figure out how much wire I need to cut off to get a good looking faucet. I'm using some tweezers to hold it in place where it's going to sit above the lower pipes, and I did decide I needed to bend it just a little bit more, but having that initial U shape made by the jig is really helpful. So now I have my two pieces, I've cut them down to the size they need to be, and I also have my lower pipes. To begin adding the details for all these pipes, we're going to cut out all the shapes in section 3. There are going to be 2 O shapes and 3 C shapes. You're going to begin by taking one of the C shapes, adding a little bit of glue to the interior, and you're going to center it on the lower pipe piece that's going to be for your faucet. This is the piece that gets stuck in the back of the sink back. You want to make sure that the opening of the C is towards the top where the faucet is going to be connected. So this is how it should look. Next, you're going to glue the other 2 C pieces directly on either side and make sure that you line up the opening at the top just like we did previously. Now you're going to slide the 2 circle pieces on either side of the 3 pieces we just glued in place and glue those down. Now we're going to remove all of the pieces in section 1, and you're going to take 2 of the ring-shaped pieces with the nodule side facing up and put them on either side of your wire. These are going to be the base pieces for your handle. Once everything is dry, you want to add some super glue to the opening above the C pieces you put in the center. This is where you're going to connect the upper part of your faucet head. You can use tacky glue plus super glue in this situation for an almost instant bond. Now you're going to add glue to the very top of your nodules that were on the ring pieces and add your faucet handles. These are going to go at the very top and just glue them in place with tacky glue. That should be strong enough to hold them. Now you're going to take one of the pieces from the section marked 4. It's just a circle you're going to slide over the faucet head. Gently slide it down, and then once you have it in place, you're going to add glue underneath the circle and then press it down onto the previously glued pieces so that everything can be stuck in place. This is just some extra protection to make sure that your faucet head doesn't go anywhere. I found that using tweezers to press it down with the glue was really helpful, and then I just removed any excess glue that was there that I didn't need. And this is how your faucet head is looking. Now we're going to work on the details for the lower pipes. First, you're going to remove all the circles, the top row of circles in section 5. You're going to glue them together in descending order, making sure that the 3 smaller donut shapes are lined up in the center so that their interior circles all align. Once those are lined up, you can make sure that the center circle is aligned by using your wire to check it. Once you know that everything is dry, you can add the top part of your wire into this hole because this is going to be the piece that covers your drain. I am using tacky glue inside of the paper circles and then some super glue on top of the wire to create an almost instant bond. This is going to sit on top of the U shape as you see on screen. Now we can go back and remove the 2 lower circles from section 5, and these pieces are going to sit on top of this flat paper surface. These are going to create a little drain area that eventually you can paint black, and when it gets glued up underneath the drain, it gives a little dimension looking like there's actually a drain and pipes underneath your sink, a place for water to go. Allow that to dry. Now you can remove all the remaining pieces in section 4. They're going to be moved along the wire in the center here, and the pieces in section 2, which are going to create a handle just like we did for the upper faucet, and it's going to go towards the back. I'll show you how those look. These are just extra details to make it look as if there's connections to the pipe. Make sure that your shutoff valve handle is not too close to the back of the wire because you will be cutting off any excess. Make sure that it lines up underneath the sink somewhere. Now that all of my paper pieces are attached, I can go over them with some silver paint so that it matches the wire. Of course, at the top of this piece, I want to paint it black so that when it's installed underneath the sink, it does look like there's more dimension down there than there really is. Once everything is dry, we can install it into the sink itself. I'm going to be adding some glue into the holes here. I'm using super glue, but it does fit rather tight, so tacky glue should work as well. I pushed the faucet pipes into the back of the sink, and this is how it's looking once it's installed. I added some extra glue at the back of the holes for some extra insurance. Now we can move on to adding the lower pipes. I'm adding some tacky glue around the drain hole and then some super glue on the very top of the paper, again for an almost instant bond. And then I can put these two together, carefully making sure that I'm lining up the drain hole underneath the drain. And then I can remove any of the excess wire. And if you find that you need to make any adjustments to your wire once it's glued, make sure that you are adjusting the wire by holding the wire in another place, and do not pull against the sink as it may cause your pipes to become unattached. Now we're going to add H1 and H2, which just get glued on top of one another. This is going to be your connector piece that goes against the wall. I painted that silver, and then I'm just going to glue the very end of the pipe into the opening of the hole and allow that to dry. This is just a great way to lay it flat on your surface so you know that once it's flat against the wall of your project, everything will glue in place. Now your sink is complete, and we can move on to one of the other pieces that come in your kit. On the other double cardstock sheet, you're going to find this top row, which is going to create your teacup shelf. Start by removing piece I with a sharp blade. You're also going to need 2 pieces marked J and 1 piece marked L. Start by gluing the edge of piece J to the front side face of piece I, and then you're going to add piece L in between the 2 J pieces. Piece L is the top of your shelf and the 2 J pieces are the sides. Now remove the 2 pieces that are marked M, and you're going to glue these together to create a double thickness. These are going to be the bottom of your shelf, and it's just helpful to have them be extra strong. Glue them in place on the front of piece I and in between the 2 pieces marked J so that it looks like this. Now you can add the remaining piece N in the center to make a middle shelf. Once all that's dry, you can cut out piece K, which is a decorative piece that goes along the front of piece L and in between the 2 J pieces. And that's how you complete the teacup shelf. Now we're going to put together the long shelf that's in the bottom right corner. All of the pieces in this section need to be glued together in matching pairs. Even the long V pieces are glued together to make a strong shelf, and 2 of the W pieces are glued together to make 3 sets. Once those are dry, you can glue the support pieces, the W pieces, into the slots that you see in the V pieces to create the shelf. This is what it should look like once it's all glued together. Allow it to dry. Now we can move on to the final piece in the bottom lower left corner. This is going to be the folding stool that actually works. Cut out all 4 pieces that are marked P. You need to glue these together so that they are a double thickness. We also cut out the pieces that are marked S. These are square pieces that are going to create the seat. Glue those together as well. Now you should have 3 pieces that are going to make up the main structure of the stool. Add glue to the top of the pieces that are marked P and glue them on the underside of piece S all the way up against the edge. Make sure that your holes align on the P pieces so that once you add the supports, everything lines up. It's a good idea to set this on a work mat to make sure everything's drying at a 90-degree angle. Now remove all 4 pieces marked Q. You're going to glue them together in pairs so that you have 2 strong side pieces for your folding step. To help support this piece as you're putting it together, you're going to need your paper clip from your accessory bag. This is going to act as a support pieces for your entire stool, but first you just need to cut out the outside edge of the paper clip to help you in this next process. This is going to slide into the 2 holes in your 2 step pieces, and then you're going to cut out the 2 pieces that are marked R, which are going to be the top of your steps. Add glue to the top flat parts of piece Q, and then add your R pieces on top of that to create the steps. This is how it's supposed to look, and this is why it's easier to have the paperclip piece so that you don't have to hold everything and keep it all in place by hand. Once it's dry, this is how the folding step looks. Do not glue the paperclip in place, it's just helping hold it while it dries. Now you're going to use the rest of the paperclip to make 4 more pieces that are the same width as your step stool. I use some kind of Sharpie or white pen to mark out how wide the pieces need to be. Once you have the paperclip pieces cut, you can add glue to either end and then slide them into place into the matching holes on either side of the stool. This takes a little bit of patience, and you will have to rub off some extra glue that you don't need, but it does get everything in place. There is one hole that you do not add the paperclip pieces into, and that is the hole that you need to add for the rotating step. That's that hole right here. Everything else needs a paperclip piece inserted and glued in place. I also added a little bit of extra glue on the outside of the paperclip holes just for some extra insurance. For the instructional video, I started painting things a little bit too early. There's a few other pieces left in the kit that you need to install, but that's okay. It'll just give you extra knowledge of where they need to go. 2 pieces marked T go on the stool. They fill in this gap in between the 2 P pieces. They go just like that, very easy to install. And then the other piece marked U is the handle that goes onto the steps, so it's easy to pull them down. It just gets glued in between the 2 pieces marked Q like this. Now I will finish painting these pieces brown. Once everything's dry, it's time to install the step. Again, I need to cut this paper clip so that it's the exact width of my stool. And then instead of gluing it in place right away, I need to thread it through the holes that are in the back of my step and through the holes in the side of the stool. This takes a little bit of patience and practice, but it is possible to do. Once I'm happy with the placement of the step and the paperclip piece, I can add some super glue to the outside holes. This is going to keep my paperclip piece in place while I'm painting. Make sure that you allow the super glue to dry completely before adding any paint. This is the completed half-scale set for the sink, the teacup shelf, the folding stool, and the long shelf. I did add a little bit more aging to these pieces after I had taken this video, and I am going to put them into a little scene so you can see how they look. Make sure if you are interested in ordering this kit that you are sure of which scale you need, either the 1/12 scale or the 1/24 scale. 1/12 scale human figures are about 5 to 6 inches tall, and 1/24 scale human figures are about 2.5 to 3 inches tall. So you can measure your figure and figure out which kit you need. If you have any questions or are interested in purchasing this kit, you can check out the website in the description below. Thanks for watching. Bye.